Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to Bike Walk Civics series. You are in the listen only mode. Please use your chat box to communicate any audio problems or to ask any questions. This is the third in the series of the 5 webinars. Today we are going to be talking about building partnerships with allies and electeds. We want to thank you to the Wisconsin Bike Fed, and special thanks to the American Heart Association for supporting the planning of these sessions. So today we're going to start with building partnerships, allies, and electeds. I'm going to, we're going to start with Dave Cheslevich again today. I don't actually see him, so I'm going to turn this. Is Dave Cheslevich in the meeting? Okay, I'm going to then turn this over to Jessica Weinberg.
Hello, everyone. Thanks. We'll see if we can resolve that issue, but otherwise, I will gladly do this part of the presentation. And Carolyn, I don't have that presentation, so I need you to stay the presenter.
Okay.
So yeah, we want to talk about partnerships and how to engage in change. One of the big concepts is just to get involved with plans that are in process. And Carolyn, I can't see your screen. I don't know if other people can.
Okay, just a moment. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But yeah, we want to really get engaged with plans that exist. That's a wonderful way to make the changes we want to see. I'll just wait a second to get the presentation lined up correctly.
Do you see it now?
Yes, looks great. Okay, next slide. Okay, so there really are so many structures that you can get involved in as a citizen to help make change. You can get involved at the state and regional level. The MPOs and the RPCs are the primary regional opportunity that you have. Those are multi-county planning organizations for higher population level locations. But then at the state government level, of course, there's lots of decisions. The governor's office, the legislator, and lots of departments. Next slide. Those are like the highest. Those are the highest level things you can get involved in, and it's definitely hardest to make change at those higher levels, and that's really where the Bike Fed works to organize and unite our voice at those higher levels. And at the local level is where it is much easier for individual citizens and smaller groups to make an impact. And really, you know, the Bike Fed is in Madison. We have a lobby day coming up in April. We love your support on the state level stuff, and then we cannot be in every local community. So that's part of why we have this course and part of why we want to see all of you be able to make changes in your communities. So getting involved in local government is great. I know there's a number of people on the call that are part of local government, maybe used to work in it. And so you can also ask each other questions. Feel free to use the chat box to ask a question to the group. There's a lot of expertise on the call, and other people may be able to answer. So you know, each location is unique. That's why being a resident of that community is the best way to be able to figure out what's going on and how to affect change. So it's great if you can talk to a city staff member or an elected official and get their opinions on what's going on, what are the big issues. I think Dave Cheslevich may be on and able to pick up the presentation from here.
Yes, I'm here. Can people hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you, Jessica and Dave.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have access to the slides, so I guess I'm just going to have to talk. Jess was doing a really great job, and so you know, she could have done fine without me. But just so folks on the line know, I used to be the mayor of Madison, and I worked. I was on the Dane County Board. I used to work in the state legislature. So don't hold any of that against me. But point is, I've got a little bit of experience in local and state government, not much in the federal government, but that doesn't impact us too much. Most of what we're going to be doing as advocates is at the local level. Some at the state, and as Jess mentioned, we are going to have a lobby day, April 13th here in Madison. It'll be about a half day. We'll get started about 11 o'clock in the morning. We will have some presentations and lunch, and then set you all loose lobbying in the legislature. We would ask you to go visit your state assembly person and also your state senator. And then we may have a few members of the powerful Joint Finance Committee that we actually ask you to stop by and see. And we'll spend a couple hours doing that. We'll come back together at 3 o'clock to sort of debrief, and then we'll have a reception with some cocktails and a chance for us to just chat informally. We're going to try to make it fun. We're also planning on getting a couple of cycle ops trainers into the Capitol Rotunda, and we'll do a little competition between Democrats and Republicans, how far they can cycle in an hour, kind of a friendly competition as opposed to some of the stuff that gets a little more serious up there. So it should be a fun day overall and an opportunity to have an impact. So if any of you on the line are at all interested in coming, please do. There'll be a nominal charge. I think we're charging something like 25 or 30 bucks, which covers lunch and materials. We don't make any money on it. It's just a question of covering our costs. And I know for some of you it's a day of travel to Madison, but we're trying to make it easy. That's why we're starting at 11, and could be done as early as 3 o'clock if you want to get on the road and skip the reception. But I have to tell you, the farther you're driving, the better it is, because the truth is, with Republicans in control of everything, as great as it is to have folks from Madison and Milwaukee, that's great. Certainly encourage you to be there. But your representatives are likely to be Democrats, and they're likely to be on our side already. And the truth is, we really need support among legislators outside of the Milwaukee-Madison area, and ideally legislators of the Republican Party, because they're running everything. So I just want to urge you, particularly if you're from outstate, to try to make it to Lobby Day. We will have more detailed information out very shortly, but I've already given you the basics. In terms of stuff we'll be lobbying on, I'm still working that out with our Public Policy Committee. But we're likely to talk about, there are actually some good things in the state budget. For example, there is $77 million more money for local roads. That's a significant increase. We're supportive of that because obviously it's the local roads that we ride on. What's likely to be controversial in the state transportation budget is funding for what are called the mega highway projects. So the expansion of I-94 and I-90, the Zoo interchange in Milwaukee, some of those big projects. We're agnostic on that because obviously cyclists are not going to ride there. So that kind of is a controversy that happily we don't need to get involved in. We can just show up and say, look, we support the increase in local road aids, and more is even better. So that's a fairly easy ask. And then there's a version of our vulnerable users bill, which we introduced before. This is a somewhat different version, but we think it has a good chance of passage. And so we'll be asking you to ask for support of that. And then there's one or two other things that may be on our agenda. So that's Lobby Day. In terms of working at the local level, and again, I don't have access to the slides, but it's not too important. Carolyn can just scroll through those once you hear something that sounds like it matches. But I think one of those slides will show you a picture that from a ride that Carolyn and I took with the La Crosse mayor, Tim Cabot, and some local officials there. That kind of thing is really important, and local officials, as a rule, are highly accessible. You know, they do these jobs for the most part part-time, particularly alders, and they're usually more than happy to meet with constituents. And if you can get them out on a bike ride, so much the better. As most of us realize, it's one thing to experience a place in a car. You know, you're surrounded by 2,500 pounds of glass and steel, you're moving pretty fast. There are things that you just don't notice when you're driving. When you're on a bicycle, you notice everything, right? You know where every pothole is, you know where the seams are uneven. You're just obviously a lot more aware of details in the landscape. And so getting a local official on a bicycle, even for just one ride, even for just a half hour, is tremendously important because it makes that local official aware of a lot of things he or she would not be necessarily aware of if they were just driving around in the cars. So I strongly encourage you to take an opportunity to get folks out on their bicycles. Spring is a great time to do it, as people are starting to think about getting outside again, and it's a great way to make a connection. Another thing I would emphasize is that, you know, politics is about relationships. Fundamentally, it's about relationships. I have had plenty of opportunities to make common cause with people who are not ideologically or politically on my side of the aisle. And the way I've been able to do that is just by developing relationships, getting to know them as people. Hopefully they get to know me as a person. We talk about all kinds of stuff outside of highly charged political issues. And you start to develop common ground as people, even if you don't necessarily agree on the issues. And that's highly valuable because when you develop a relationship with someone, a long-term relationship, they're more inclined to listen to you. Even if initially they don't agree with what you're saying, they're much more inclined to give you the time of day and possibly be persuaded. Another thing that happens is because they know it's a long-term relationship and not just a one-off, they're far more likely to, if they're going to vote against you one time, they want to vote with you another time because they want to maintain that relationship. And, you know, in purely a transactional sense, they may want to get reelected and they would like to have your support. And so I can't emphasize enough the importance of developing not just a one-off, you know, go visit your alder person one time, go visit your mayor one time, but rather an ongoing relationship in which you make multiple efforts to contact that person, spend a little time with them when you can, chat on the phone when you can, anything you can do to continue that as an ongoing discussion and dialogue as opposed to just a one-time, you know, demanding their vote on something, that's going to be far more valuable. Another thing to keep in mind mind in dealing with officials, not just local officials, but anyone, is just think about how you like to be treated. You know, when someone's talking to you and asking something from you, if you have children or if you've been a child yourself, and you want something from your parents, you can recall how you approached them and what was successful and what wasn't. Things don't change much in politics. Obviously, people who are pleasant, who are polite, who are respectful, are going to get listened to more than people who are demanding, loud, and obnoxious. And again, sometimes people, I think, are misled because you can be loud, demanding, and obnoxious one time and force someone to listen to you, but think about how you feel when you're put in those situations, right? You're not inclined to want to continue to work with that person. You may feel forced to do something in the short run, but in the long run, it's very damaging to the relationship. And again, this is, you know, it's about relationships. There's nothing about politics, and there's nothing about working with officials that's any different from working with anybody else under any other circumstances, whether it's relationships at work or relationships with your family. The same rules apply, and sometimes I think people kind of lose sight of that. For some reason, they think someone who is in an elected position or an official position doesn't carry around the same emotions, the same reactions that they do, but they do. They're just people, and so it's important to remember that. You're also going to want to build relationships with people who aren't elected, and particularly in local government, those unelected people are in some ways as important or more important than the mayor or an alder or a county supervisor. They tend to be there for a long time. And if there's something they don't want to do, they usually feel that they can outwait the elected official. There are a million ways for unelected folks to drag their feet or in some way obstruct something that they think is bad public policy or for whatever reason they don't want to do. By the same token, you can have an elected official who isn't necessarily on your side, but if you have the long-term staff on your side, sometimes you can accomplish things that way. So in a lot of ways, your city traffic engineer, your city engineer, your police chief, your park superintendent, those folks can be even more valuable relationships than the elected officials. But all the rules, same rules still apply. They're still people. They still react the same way. It's still long-term relationships. It's still about doing more than just one-offs. It's not burning your bridges. Same kind of tools that you learned in kindergarten, but just important not to forget that the folks who aren't elected can sometimes actually be as important or more important than the folks who stand for election. We are going, it's spring, and in a lot of places, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, there will be local spring elections. Here in Madison, for example, the city council is being reelected. Different communities will do that in different ways and on different cycles. All of the local elections are in the spring with primaries in February and general elections in April. Those are nonpartisan seats, but alders, mayors, county supervisors, those folks are always up in the spring on different cycles depending on which community you live in, but you can always pretty much be guaranteed that you're going to have a local office to vote on in the spring. So it is March, and so the elections are the first Tuesday in April, and if you're not aware of it already, you'll want to go on your local government website and see who's up for re-election. And the truth is, having been a politician myself, I'm very much aware that a few weeks before election time, I was even more sensitive to the views of my constituents than I would be at a different time. So this is a good time to be contacting your local officials, even if even if they're running unopposed. The thing about politicians is they very closely look at how many votes they get, even when they're running unopposed. And so even somebody who's going to be reelected is more inclined to be super sensitive to you right now than they will be the day after the election. So it's a good time to make a contact to your local officials. And then legislators, of course, they're partisan offices. Partisan offices in Wisconsin are elected in the fall. So August primaries and November general elections. And we're in the off-year cycle for that. So legislators were just reelected last fall, and they won't come up again until 2018. But every member of the Assembly will be up in 2018, and half of the state Senate will be up that year. I think I covered a lot of stuff kind of fast, but I think I will stop there and see if anyone has questions, or Jess and Carolyn, if there's something I didn't cover that I should have. If you want to prompt me, please go right ahead.
Thank you, Dave, and I apologize for the technical issue. I tried to mute everyone, but it seems as if it would work better if each person would mute themselves unless they're talking. And we did have one question that is the $77 million for creating new roads or repairs and maintenance?
Well, that's a good question. It's primarily for repair. So there are, without getting into the weeds here, there are 3 programs that fund local roads. And for the most part, this is money that's going to go into resurfacing roads, paving shoulders, fixing potholes, that kind of thing. It's not that none of the money could be used for adding a lane, but the way these resources typically get used is for road repair. And Wisconsin is really behind the 8 ball with regard to maintaining our existing infrastructure. By some ratings, we're among the, not just the bottom half, but among the bottom few states in terms of the conditions of our roads and streets. And so money that's going to be provided to local governments, is the lion's share of it is going to go into repair as opposed to expanding existing roads.
And there was a reply from James from WisDOT Southeast Region. He said it would also be a mix of new and rehabilitative construction projects. Most of them in the pending budget are rehab and maintenance. Mm-hmm. And there was a question, Lobby Day again, the date for that?
Oh, Lobby Day is Thursday, April 13th. It will be here in Madison. We will start the day meeting at the Concourse Hotel, which is just off the square. And registration, well, we'll ask people to pre-register, but you can also walk in. Registration will open at probably 10. The actual Lobby Day activities will begin at 11 o'clock. Senator Fred Risser will be there. Representative Mike Rohrkast from MENA, a Republican, will be there to speak. And Mark Gottlieb, who is just retired as DOT Secretary and joined the Bike Fed Board, will be there to talk about the DOT budget. And then I'll give a brief lobbying overview on the issues that we're going to be talking about, and some tips on effective lobbying. You will have a packet that you can bring to your state representative and state senator with everything outlined, but we'll prepare you well, so everybody should feel comfortable going in to talk to their legislators. The legislators will be given a heads up that you're coming. We're not going to be able to specifically schedule everybody, but no legislative office will be surprised to see you. And so at the very least, you'll talk to an aide, but in a lot of cases, you'll get a chance to talk to the legislator. And then we'll do that for a few hours in the afternoon, come back together, do some debrief, and hopefully enjoy some camaraderie and a cocktail at the end of the day.
All right, thank you. And just a comment that if anyone's interested in running for office, that'd be a great contribution. So thank you, Dave.
Yes, sure.
Go ahead. Something else? Next, I would like to turn the show over to Jen Gilchrist Walker. Jen is an active communities coordinator for Health Tide, Wisconsin's statewide obesity prevention partner network. She also coordinates the Wisconsin Active Communities Alliance peer learning network of local coalition leaders working to advance active community strategies in their communities. She serves as a connector, convener, and facilitator, allowing state and local stakeholders to identify and advance shared interests in creating healthier communities. Before that, she served as a technical assistance provider and community coach for a great initiative that funded local coalitions to create policy and environmental change around active living and healthy eating. Jen has a background in public health and city and regional planning. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Thanks, Carolyn. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen and go into slide mode. Let's see. Okay, great. So can you see the slides, Carolyn?
We can see it.
Okay. So I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the Bike Walk Civics today, and I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for having me here. So I just wanted to take probably about 15 minutes and talk a little bit about some ways that you can connect with partnerships and larger networking opportunities that are happening across the state. So just a little bit about me, and Carolyn provided the background, but I'm Jen Walker again, Statewide Active Communities Coordinator. So I'm situated within UW-Madison in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health. And so I help coordinate the two different partnership networks related to active communities in the state. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. I wanted to start out with a brief story to highlight the power of networks and partnerships when you're working towards policy change. I'll start that with a little bit of background. In 2015, when there were some broad efforts among partners to try to keep our state's Complete Streets law in place. You might know that Complete Streets policy helps to ensure that road construction projects, when they're being planned, include bike and pedestrian ways as sort of a default setting, that they're included every time rather than having to have them planned in every time or get a special permission to do that. And so over time, it just helps us create a broader and better, more complete network of places to walk and bike and be active. And so that law in 2015 was proposed for repeal. Unfortunately, it basically was repealed, and so so this isn't a success story to say that, hey, the networks, the power of networks ended up changing the outcome of that campaign, but there were some good things that happened, so I'll focus on that part of it. And so what I want to share is that when this happened in 2015, we had a lot of partners who were doing advocacy work. The Bike Fed was definitely one of the big voices on that from the bike community, and many health partners were also educating around the health benefits of active environments. And we had a coalition in Green Bay who took an interesting approach in their advocacy work. Their community health coalition is housed within the Greater Green Bay Chamber of Commerce. So because of that, they had a really strong existing relationship between health partners and the Chamber of Commerce, who takes more of an economic development and a local business focus. And so the Chamber of Commerce saw this issue as an economic issue and something important to their efforts to recruit and retain young professionals and families. And so they talked to, and they're able to do advocacy and lobbying sort of from that perspective and with that voice. So they're the ones who took the issue to their local key officials and their electeds. And we noticed from their reports having that issue advocated for by an economic development partner seemed to have an impact on the officials in their area. So the American Heart Association wrote a grant to try to scale up that approach and get many more partners connecting with chambers and speaking up and saying this is an important issue for us. And so I was involved in that effort. It was led by the Heart Association, and so it was a good success in terms of connecting with many more partners that we hadn't before. But what we found was that there just weren't enough existing connections and relationships between health folks and the Walk Bike coalitions and local economic development partners in order to mobilize quickly enough to get a broad swell and sort of change the outcome on that issue. But it did lead us to do some figuring out of how to encourage and build more of those relationships in the sort of at a time when there wasn't a specific advocacy issue to work on. And so that experience in itself, I think, was an opportunity to learn about the power of networks for all of us, and how our strategic communications and the messenger has a good ability to influence and sway audiences. So hopefully what I'll share in the next few minutes can help you learn about some of the potential networks that exist right now in our state that you might be able to tap into in your own local work to create more walkable, bikeable, healthy, vibrant community environments. So this map shows the Wisconsin Active Communities Alliance, or WACA for short. This is a peer learning and action network of local coalitions that are working to, it's a peer network, so they come together and sort of share their own successes or challenges. And it was created by people who work on active community issues locally. We have a core team, a core leadership team that's, you see that in the yellow dots on the screen there, from across the state, and then the blue dots are communities either within that county. So it may be someone from the county level, it may be someone from a municipality within that county who's been part of the network and been on. We have a monthly networking call. We do facilitate one-to-one connections between people who kind of a matchmaking thing where if one community is working on something with some success and another maybe struggling with that similar issue, we can sort of be a facilitation or connection broker. And then we also try to keep everyone in the network up to date on things that are happening within the statewide active communities movement and discussions, so that we can be a more unified voice and have more voices from local communities to inform decisions and priorities that statewide partners like state agencies or groups like the Bike Fed and other nonprofits, so that they can, get a better pulse and hear what priorities are in local communities. So we think that these kind of two-way conversations between state and local are really important, and WACA's been a big enabler to make that happen. So I mentioned that WACA has monthly networking calls. I help to coordinate this group. So if you're interested in getting on that list, you can visit activecommunitieswi.org. The calls are on the fourth Wednesday of every month. So we've got one coming up next week as well. And you can click on the connect button on WACA's website to connect in. Another network that I just wanted to highlight is the Main Street program, which is part of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. We have a number of communities throughout our state, and I mentioned those connections with economic development partners. The Main Street partners, you may, if you notice, if you're in a community where there's a dot that represents a Main Street program, that may be something to look into, a network locally that you can tap into and start to build connections there. And then just looking on the next page, the Main Street program also has the Connect Community program, which is kind of like a Main Street Light. And it's for communities that aren't quite ready to commit to a full Main Street program, but they still are doing work in that similar area. So there's a lot more in the Connect Communities realm. And so if you go to WEDC's website, they have lists of contact people who are in each of these communities who are kind of a lead contact. That's another network that exists that you can tap into within to build your local work. So now I want to shift to the state level. We also have a statewide partner network that's focused on moving active communities goals forward at the state level. So my role within HealthTide, which is HealthTide is our statewide network of people working on active physical activity and healthy eating issues, and looking at making healthy choices the easier choice for people in communities across the state. So our role is to provide backbone support to convene partners and try to identify shared goals and be able to take action on steps so that we can accomplish more together than we could individually as each partner organization. So we have, there's about over 60 organizations that are part of these efforts right now. We're constantly building the network as well. The Bike Fed is a partner. The Heart Association, Thousand Friends of Wisconsin, for example, is nonprofits. We have academic partners from various UW campuses. Many state agencies are at the table. We're connected in with the DNR, Health Department, the Economic Development Corporation, DOT. And so also WACA, the Active Communities Alliance, has also been very involved in these statewide conversations. So that, again, is another good way to connect local and statewide conversations. Just to give you an overview of the different teams that HealthTide helps to coordinate and provide support to. So I work on the Active Communities team. We also are convening groups around healthy food retail, schools, early childhood education, and advocacy. And then within the Active Communities team, we've worked with partners through a prioritization process. Looking at that kind of resulted in 3 overarching priority areas around active transportation, community design, and land use, which is, if we kind of think about activity hubs or downtowns, or looking at ways to create more density so that things are closer together and people can walk and bike to places. And then places to play and be active, so things like parks and recreational facilities, as kind of the 3 big things that if we could all work on these strategies and get progress and traction on these, then we would be able to move the needle and sort of, instead of everyone doing more scattered efforts. So within active transportation, which has kind of been the key focus ever since the Complete Streets campaign started or happened in 2015, now we've been working more on the local level on encouraging and finding ways to support local communities in considering complete streets policies or safe routes to school initiatives, and also things that strategies that may help lead into those types of policies. So I guess the overall takeaway on all this is just that there is a statewide network that's working on all these things, and anyone's able to tap into it and become part of it and get more information and bring that back to your community as well. And then I also wanted to show this is a one-pager. It's an example of a way that WACA and HealthTide are working to align partners around strategy areas. So this is a one-pager. You can download it on WACA's website. I don't have that website on the next slide to show you. But it has to do with communications and messaging. And after the Complete Streets campaign, when we realized we needed way more partners in economic development to help to strengthen the message of why we need more transportation options for everybody. So this is a sheet that talks about the benefits of active transportation from strictly an economic perspective. It really doesn't mention health at all. And so if you wanted to download the sheet and use it to connect with someone in your Chamber of Commerce or a local business or a public works director, anyone in your community who you think maybe may take sort of that type of lens in their work. This is a sheet that you can use, or they could use it to educate elected officials to say, this is why this is important to us for these reasons. So our hope is that by building more partners in the economic impact sector into our coalitions, that this can help advance active transportation issues at the local level and the state level. So finally, just connecting into these networks, here's some information that you may want to jot down about the Wisconsin Active Communities Alliance. Here's the website. you can click on updates to get the one-pager sheet that I just showed you. So if you go to activecommunitieswi.org, click on updates, and then you'll find that one-pager, and you can download it as a PDF right from the website. On WACA's homepage, if you click connect, you can share your information, and then I'll reach back out to you, or you can get on our email list and join monthly calls. You may want to find out if there's already a coalition working on these issues in your area. If they're part of our list, I can connect you with them as well. And then for the Health Tide Active Communities team, you can contact me as well. And also my colleague John Morgan at the Department of Health Services is really instrumental and works with us, works on this a lot as well. So you can contact John as well, either of us. So that's all I have, but I'm happy to take any questions as well.
Thank you, Jen. Wonderful presentation with lots of good resources, and I will send out your list of resources. If anyone has, I don't see anything in the chat box, but if anyone has any questions, this will be a great time to ask them. And you can put them in the chat box as well. Next, I'm going to send the presentation screen back over to Jessica. Jessica is the Wisconsin Bike Fed Program Director. Jessica created and directs many programs, including Share and Be Aware, a statewide adult education campaign, Bike Walk Civics, and Milwaukee Walks.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be back. So I wanted to make sure that Bike Walk Civics doesn't forget about the walking part. So I do work at the Bike Fed, but I care a lot about walking, and the whole organization does. And so we are working on a pilot right now in Milwaukee of a citywide walking advocacy group. And I'm going to hopefully share a little bit of our story to give you ideas about starting something in your own community. It's easy, you can do it, you just have to be persistent. So this is me. I love to walk everywhere I go. I'm actually consciously trying to walk more rather than bike more in my life right now to just enjoy that side of things. And I want walking to be great for everybody. It is such a beautiful thing that our bodies are made to do. And I really am starting to think about walking as a civil rights or human rights issue, that we should get to move freely and comfortable on foot in our communities. And that should actually be the first thing we think about, not the last thing. So sometimes we get to walk in beautiful places like this. Sometimes we don't. I think right now we have such a problem with pedestrians being considered second class. Like, we have to go up and press this button and sometimes wait for 2 minutes or a long time for the signal to change. And I guess my success for me in 20 years or something would be that there are no more of these pedestrian push buttons, and that we design our system to, because there's going to be people walking, and we let them easily and safely cross the street as part of the design, and they don't have to touch what some people call is a beg button. And I think it's really interesting to think about what happens culturally when we make people wait on the side of the street, and we don't really count that in our transportation planning, but then we totally count delay of drivers and how long are they delayed at a light. And that's not fair. It's not how we should do it, and I hope we can change it, and collectively we can work towards that. Someone had a sense of humor. It's hard to see, but they put a little sticker that says, "You are beautiful." And I think that's also pretty funny to see that these buttons are frustrating. And someone admitted, hey, this is frustrating, but I want to give somebody a nice message while they wait. So what are the little things we can all do to make the pedestrian environment better? Here's just another example. Look at this crosswalk. Could you have a more obvious crosswalk? But still the drivers don't yield, even for children. And again, the onus is really getting put on the pedestrian. Hey, did you look? Are you being super careful? Not, hey, drivers, this is like a national park. People need to walk. You need to yield. And I just hope to flip this around. And I think that to get active at the local level, you have to get fed up. So this truck was on the trail on my ride or walk to take my son to school. And I was like, this is the truck on the trail. It really fed me up and made me decide to act. And the first step was calling the owner of the trail and asking them to put up signage or issue tickets. Took a lot of calls and a lot of emails. I was sending photos every day that there was a car parked there, and it was different cars. But me and my son had success. They put a no parking. This is a bike lane area. Over where that car was parked, they put a different sign. So, you know, this was great. We had this little bit of success. My son was involved in it because it was on the ride to school. It's cool. He now knows you can make a small change. But you know what? This change is tiny. This is one trail. It's just not systematic. And if walking is going to change, it needs to be way more systematic, the way we're going to approach it. So I realized we need partners to work together. And I think in August, actually, I think in December, we called the first meeting of Milwaukee Walks. We didn't quite have a name yet, but I just reached out to people that I knew that were interested in walking. The City of Milwaukee does have a bicycle and pedestrian task force, so I invited those members, a professor that works on walking and biking issues, someone from transit, a professor that just happens to be really interested in this, some lawyers who are very interested in walking issues, and kind of just through personal contacts, we got a group of about 10, this is one of our meetings, and started talking about what is the issue with walking in Milwaukee and what can we do to change it. The big thing we came up with is that crosswalk law is a huge issue. Very few drivers in Milwaukee yield to people crossing the street. So our main message is really getting this little infographic into the minds and hearts of everybody in Milwaukee. Just how do we get motorists to know that they need to yield in marked and unmarked crosswalks? So we have all these great partners with lots of different skills. It's been really exciting that, you know, if you invite 10 people to come do something and then you talk about what you're going to do and you ask them to invite some people, with a group of 10 or 15 people, 20 people, you can really make change, and that's even in the city of Milwaukee and only since December. So if you're in a smaller community, be excited if you have 3 partners working on something. So we've gotten together as a group. We've decided, we took a poll to decide what our top priority issues were. The main one was getting drivers to yield. So we are using a lot of existing materials, some of which are from the Bike Fed. This is a Spanish language driver education brochure. You know, how can we get this into more hands? How can we work together? So we're developing some ideas around that. Here's part of our plan. It really is pretty basic, and it's supposed to be like that because this is our action plan. It's going to be changing. We have our 5 short-term goals. Again, those were from a really simple poll that we took. And I'd say 30 people took the poll, I think. And we have about 8 to 15 people at various meetings. You know, when we thought about how are we going to change the pedestrian, the pedestrian experience by getting motorists to drive differently, we really realized we needed to work with the police, that enforcement kind of has to be part of the solution. So we thought we want to talk to the chief of police. Wouldn't that be great to talk to the chief of police and just say, this is an issue that matters. There's been a pedestrian death in every single aldermanic district in the past 3 years, I want to say, in Milwaukee. So this, you know, this really matters to every alderman in every district, every neighborhood. And we were so lucky. We got a meeting. I thought it was going to take us months to try to just get the meeting with the chief of police. I didn't feel comfortable taking a picture with him. He's a very serious guy. So this is all of us in the minutes before we're waiting for him. But we are in like the chief operations room for the police. We had to get a bigger room because there was more of us than they expected. And we had a full hour to talk about these issues, to talk about the fact that African Americans in Wisconsin are twice as likely to be the victim of a pedestrian car crash. We talked about the unequal burdens of additional enforcement and what does that mean for communities. We had a really good dialogue. We both learned from each other. And we have not just the meeting as a first win, but we do have a promise to work together with Jennifer Lack, who's pictured there, and who oversees the Bureau of Transportation Safety Bicycle and Pedestrian Program. She is giving funds for additional enforcement to the City of Milwaukee Police to specifically target the driver behaviors that lead to bicycle and pedestrian crashes. So we're going to be working with her and with this Milwaukee Police Department to target the locations and the times of those enforcement actions, and then also working to get the word out to the media and the community to have those result in as much education as possible. We want to get the news there to be filming, hey, today people are getting tickets on Capitol Drive if they don't stop for pedestrians. But guess what? That's the law every single day. And it's the law everywhere. So we're going to work to get that message out. And then we're going to keep working on our pedestrian plan. One of our other big ideas is to build better relationships with the alders so they understand how they can be effective in helping to make the city safer for people walking. Crazy traffic is one of the main complaints they get, and we want to be an ally to help them address that. And I just have this slide here. This isn't an alder in Milwaukee. This is Senator Risser. But this just like is showing that we want to connect with elected officials, and turns out one of the best ways to connect with them is to go for a walk. One day in Madison, the Share and Be Aware staff was going for a walk and a bike tour, and we come across Senator Risser out on the sidewalk, and we got to talk to him and thank him for being the longest serving elected official in the country and being such a good supporter of walking and biking issues throughout that time. And, you know, we got to do that because Madison's a great place to walk. The sidewalks are like 20 feet wide. It's so enjoyable, and this really, you know, points to the social cohesion and the connection that is what we're really working towards when we're working towards a safer pedestrian environment. And, you know, you never know who you're going to run into when you go for a walk, and maybe they'll in the future be, you know, the key vote you need. And Senator Risser is considering reintroducing complete streets, and we are so thankful for that. So I think the conclusion of what I hope you take away from my quick presentation is that all it takes is a few people getting together, getting fed up, saying, hey, who's fed up about this with me? Who wants to take it on? And then try to make it playful. The whole point is to have freedom and to get to enjoy our communities and walk, do handstands, whatever it might be. So my charge, I think, as Milwaukee Walks moves into its, you know, 4th month of being in existence, is how do we keep it fun? We are hoping to do a pedestrian safety week. Maybe we'll call it walking week. And we're really debating if we want the anchor event to be talking about fatalities, because it's such a serious issue, and it's a way to get the community's attention and the attention of the media. Or do we want a more playful, joyful connection to walking? And I really, actually, if anyone has any opinions in the chat that they want to share about, you know, what attracts you to a movement, is it, you know, thinking about death, or is it talking about beautiful places for kids to play and how they should be able to cross the street, or older people getting to walk to the pharmacy? Yeah, share your thoughts on that, and I hope you get to play today and every day.
Thanks, Jessica, for those really inspiring ideas. I do have a question. How do you demonstrate that bicyclists and pedestrians' interests overlap with transit interests?
Yeah, so our transit connection really makes that himself, so we never had to like argue with him, but every single bus passenger is a pedestrian at some point. Some are bicyclists, but even if you put your bike on the rack, then you walk around to the bus. And the bus company really sees that they have about 600,000 boardings a day, I think it is. And every one of those people are pedestrians. I've been in their training, and they do such a careful training with their drivers to make sure they are looking around for pedestrians, whether or not they're their customers or not, when they're driving. And they really see that, they know that their customers are pedestrians and are a really good ally.
Okay, and there's another question about would there be a fee for kids to go to Lobby Day?
I don't know. We'd have to figure that out. Honestly, the fee's basically for lunch, so I'm pretty sure if you only need one packet for your whole family, and then it's kind of just a question of lunch, and I can look into if we can just do an add-on, or you can bring your own lunch if your kids are picky. But we'll work that out.
A response to your question, definitely talking about beautiful places to go for a walk and share with the community in open landscapes.
Yeah.
And then a comment, thank you, Jessica, for all your work. I love the idea about making Walking Week about play and joy and health. So you have a lot of support out there, Jessica.
Oh, good. Well, if we in Milwaukee commit to doing Walking Week and set some dates, I will share them with this group, and we would love to see it be statewide. I should add that Share and Be Aware has done Wisconsin Walks October. October is a great pedestrian month. We have Halloween at the end, the pedestrian holiday, and Walk and Bike to School Day at the beginning of the month. And that's great. Our group just right now is like, oh, we don't really want to wait till October. So maybe we'll have a walking week and we'll still have Wisconsin Walks October. So if you're interested, pencil in October definitely for doing some pedestrian events, and the Bike Fed and Share and Be Aware can help promote those at a statewide level to really make the case in lots of communities that this is very important.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So now we're lucky enough to have Anthony or Tony Fernandez back again. He is a professional engineer. He's been working in transportation engineering and planning for about 35 years. He retired a year ago after 16 years with City of Madison Engineering Division. For his first 20 years of career as a consulting engineer focused mainly on major freeways and expressways, urban in Chicago and rural in Wisconsin. In 1997, he began designing bicycle facilities, which then became his main area of practice during his tenure at the city. Tony has a lifelong love of biking, primarily for transportation purposes, regular bike commuter when feasible for more than 55 years. Tony began with a paper route at age 10. So welcome, Tony, and thank you again for returning. So many people were interested in your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. So I tell people I've been a bike commuter for 55 years. It raises eyebrows, but that's literally true. And so very pleased to be here again. It's going to be a similar presentation to the last time, so if you've already seen this one, feel free to skip out. But I'd like to talk about engineering issues as they affect advocacy. And this is not really going to be nuts and bolts, looking at every possible bike facility, but I'm going to touch on most of them one way or the other as I go through it. And it's also not going to be nuts and bolts with every technical standard, but I'm going to have some resources at the end that will guide people to that. What I really want to focus on is a few higher level ideas that are at the intersection of engineering and advocacy. And I also want to just disclose right at the beginning, I realize there's a lot more than, my talk is going to focus on infrastructure. There's a lot more to bike advocacy than infrastructure, obviously. The education and the enforcement and the encouragement and all the other aspects of it. But this talk is going to strictly focus on infrastructure type items. So here are the main themes I want to touch on. First of all, measure success in mode share, not miles. It's an easy trap to get into how many miles of bike paths we have in the city, how many miles of bike lanes, that kind of thing. That can be distorting at best, right? What we really are after are more people biking, and that shift in how we measure success can sometimes change our priorities. Second, focus on the low-stress network to attract new riders. We have to serve an exceptionally broad range of people in bike improvements, and we want to serve everybody, including the most experienced riders who have been the backbone, really, of the advocacy movement for many years. But really, to attract new riders, we need to specifically focus on a low-stress network of bike paths. I'll talk more about what that is later. Third, embrace innovation, but don't overlook basic network of local streets. So there's a lot of sexy ideas around now for some very beautiful bike improvements that look great, but they're never going to replace just our basic street network as something of a backbone for biking. So we really need to look at the whole range of improvements from the most innovative ones to some of the simplest improvements on local streets. Fourth, I want to say look beyond complete streets. We all have talked about complete streets. We all know how important that is, but it really is a shortcut idea. And from an engineering standpoint, we really need to be talking about complete networks. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. Look for solutions with greater than zero-sum benefits. This ties into some of the ideas that Dave Jesslevich brought out and others have brought out, but really we need to look at areas where we can improve biking without diminishing other modes of transportation or unnecessarily creating conflict. And finally, I've got just some catch-all engineering issues and some published resources that will be helpful. So, mode share. This is a shot from Europe, and it looks like a normal street, right? It's got curb and gutter, it's got sidewalks on either side. What it doesn't have, of course, is cars. This is what could result when we have, a 30%, 35% mode share, as we do in some European cities. We have these fabulous facilities. So mode share is important. It makes us all safer as riders when there are more riders on the street, and it also increases the ability to put this kind of investment in infrastructure. When there are larger numbers of riders, we can really do very improved infrastructure. When we're looking at mode share, safety is going to be the most important issue. That's what is going to attract people to riding. That's consistently comes out as people's main obstacle. People who would ride a bike but are not riding it, time and time again, cite safety. But the location of facilities, location improvements is also important to make it easy to access, convenient, and data is important. So we'll talk about all those things. I love this picture. We did a safety improvement. This is a bicycle intersection with a major path. We've got 4 miles of path. It's a beautiful path. As soon as we built it, we had thousands of riders on it. But it got to a very complex intersection and really discouraged people. We built this improvement about 7 years ago, and to get through that intersection, and 2 days after we built it, I came back with a camera. I did not post this picture. These two little girls were confidently crossing this very busy street because we created a very clear crossing, separate bicycle signals, a much simplified interaction with traffic, and even kids can now cross this busy intersection very easily. When we talk about safety, perception is really important, perception of safety. For most people, that really means separation from vehicles. So for a low-stress network, for attracting new riders, most people are not comfortable riding alongside 2 feet away from a motor vehicle that's traveling 35 miles an hour. So we need to talk about separation from vehicles, and we need to talk about good visual clues so that people know where they belong through an intersection. In complicated areas, they really have a sense of belonging there. So for a low-stress network, separate paths are they're the gold standard, right? Nothing can be less stressful. This is the same path you were looking at. There's 4.5 miles of it. It was an abandoned rail corridor. Beautiful area. But the important thing to realize here, there are corridors that work for this. Railroads, waterways, sometimes along freeways. But you can't create these everywhere. This is really sometimes opportunities provide these kinds of corridors, and we really have to seize that and put our infrastructure dollars there and our efforts and our advocacy efforts. But it's difficult to create these corridors. So that's part of it. The other thing is that even when we have the corridors, convenient access is absolutely critical. Sometimes a railroad or waterway can be a barrier to access as well as an opportunity. So we have to look at creating accesses, and a route is often judged by its most difficult segment. So you could have 3 miles of an excellent path, but if it runs into a terrible intersection at one point, people will not use it. We'll talk a little more about all those things. Good data is, of course, an important aspect of creating a, increasing mode share and documenting mode share. This graphic is from we have a few special counters in the city of Madison that display in real time the number of people crossing that, and then they display it to the web in a format like you're seeing here that shows how many people are crossing that area. This is not the most complete data, but this type of data really supports public acceptance and infrastructure investment, so it's really important. But what I want to emphasize here is that there's no substitute for on-the-ground experience. So when we want to build mode share, we want to look at what improvements need to be built and how effective they're going to be. Really, the experience of advocates and riders is indispensable, particularly for the issue of gap identification. So when we're designing our low-stress network, we're designing for an extremely broad range of user characteristics, right? People from 8 to 80, everyone from kids who have no idea what traffic rules are, to athletic bicyclists, to handicapped folks, to elderly people. So it's quite a challenge to make sure that we have accommodated all those folks. We have to do our best to include as many people as possible. I just want to talk about the name low stress network. That's what we're using most frequently now. There have been other ways of measuring that level of service, kind of drawn from the automobile world. Was an attempt to kind of define that, but I would recommend that we just think of this as a low stress network and work toward those goals. One of the important pieces of that puzzle is to understand bikes as a separate mode from pedestrians. A lot of our, particularly on our shared use paths, we have people going 2 miles an hour and people trying to go 20 miles an hour, sharing the same facility. And so I'll talk about that more later, but we're really evolving into a time when we need to begin looking at pedestrians and bicyclists as really separate modes of transportation and accommodating them separately, because there's a lot of stress that even comes from the pedestrian bicycle conflict, not just the automobile conflict. And just to really focus particularly on paths, the importance of marking, signing, other visual treatments to make things really intuitive. So it's more than just the route, it's the visual environment there that allows people to understand where they are, where they're going, guide signs, etc. Separate paths are great. This is the before picture where those two little girls were crossing the street. This is what happens when a separate path crosses a busy street and we haven't paid enough attention to that intersection. So you can see that it could be a very highly functional route, but it could be underutilized because of an area like this. Those sorts of separate corridors are difficult to locate, they're difficult to complete, there often are places that we simply can't get through. So we have to see our path network as really the gold standard of the low stress network, but it's never going to be a complete network. We're going to have to be looking obviously at on-street improvements as well. So let's look at the on-street situation a little bit. The best solution for low stress on street are separated bike paths, separated bike lanes, pardon me. These have been called in the past cycle tracks, and there's some other terminology. I think probably the best terminology and most current is protected bike lanes. And this depicts a one-way bike lane that's separated from traffic by a painted buffer area as well as flexible posts. There are a lot of different ways to create this separation, but the important point here is that there's physical separation, not just paint on the street. Gives bicyclists a much higher level of confidence, particularly if you've got high volumes or high speeds of traffic. These come in a few different flavors. We can have one-way separated lanes that function alongside in the same direction as moving traffic. That's the most common. There can be two-way separated bike lanes. We'll show you a picture of one of those in a minute. Or counter-directional, where you have a one-way street and you create a separated bike lane in the opposite direction. One thing I want to point out, sometimes these notions get a bad rep because they look like what we used to call side paths, which are shared use paths immediately adjacent to a high volume street. Those tend to be difficult situations at the crossings. This is completely different, and what makes it completely different is that a protected bike lane is bicycles only. So we are not talking here about a shared use facility. We're talking about a bicycle only facility, and that makes the control of it and the safety issues considerably different. So there are challenges, there are limitations to when these can be applied. They obviously cannot happen in a lot of cases. They're expensive, maintenance can be an issue, control of intersections can be an issue. But for certain major streets, this is really how we ought to be looking at creating a low-stress network. And I'm going to refer you to some more information later from a group called NACTO. So one step below that is something that we might call a bike priority street, which is referred to at times as bike boulevards. Again, the terminology is pretty indistinct. I like the term bike priority streets. Bike boulevards, I think, is ill-defined and sometimes confusing. But what's really important here is that we've taken what is essentially an ordinary street and we've allowed it to continue to be used as an ordinary street by cars, but we have created special control devices, marking, signing, visual treatment to define it as a bicycle priority street, to reduce the speeds and the volume. So there's two real main techniques here. One is volume management, meaning reducing the automobile volume. So it still has to function for access to driveways and parks or whatever it was functioning for. But if we interrupt a street periodically, and that's what this picture is showing, to automobiles and allow only bikes, we can get a pretty dramatic reduction in the volume of automobile traffic and make the street much more usable for bikes. The other important issue is speed management, sometimes with chicanes, bump outs, other various features to reduce the travel speed, the vehicular speed. The main idea here being that the bicycle is sharing the pavement with automobiles, and so we need to have lower volumes and lower speeds. I have kind of walked right by standard bike lanes. I won't talk much about that. They are obviously an important part of the bicycle network, familiar to most people. However, they do have a lot of limitations, particularly as they've often been applied with high volume, high speed streets. They just are not very usable by people who are not extremely confident, and so I have not included them in the low stress network. Let me show, this is a bike priority street in Europe. This is really the full expression of this type of idea. So we still are permitting automobiles here. People can still get to their homes, they can get to their driveways, they can park, but all of the visual cues here make it very clear that it's appropriate for automobiles to be going very slow and for bikes to have the priority. This is a wonderful idea. It's, I think, extremely applicable to our cities here and underutilized because something like this really satisfies the public. The homeowners even can find this a beautiful addition to their neighborhood because it's narrow. There's potential for more green space than on a typical street. It's applicable to narrow right-of-ways. So this is where I think we really should be going as advocates and engineers on a lot of our streets to define really high-quality streets. One step below that, this is a street in Madison that is designated a bike boulevard, but as you can see, it doesn't really have a lot of remarkable characteristics here, but there is signage, there's marking, there's sharrows on the road that really define this as a bike boulevard, as a street where where bicyclists have priority, cars ought to be going more slowly, while still providing access and parking and things for the automobile driver. This is a this is another quotes Bike Boulevard in Madison. You can see the type of marking that's there. Indicates for the driver that they will be encountering bicycles in their lane, not shoved off against the curb, and it gives the bicyclist confidence as well to use the center of the lane. Important issue here, of course, is that sometimes pavement condition is just not adequate for bicyclists. If we're going to be creating bike priority streets, we also have to make sure that we're maintaining the pavement at a higher level, and particularly winter maintenance is very important. Finally, I want to mention the local street network, really crucial, obviously, to bicycle mobility. The main problem, of course, is continuity. Most of our local streets are great to ride on, but you get 3 or 4 blocks and now you're stuck. You have to go out to a major street. So this is a technique that can be used in a lot of places. I think it's underutilized right now, which is a bicycle-only link. So what you see on the screen here, very large residential neighborhood here, and it extends quite a ways to the east of that. A very large employment area here. It's a research park. There's daycare centers and lots of jobs here. There was no connection between the two, and only a very busy street up here that is not very appropriate for biking. We punched through a very short bike path, connected the two, created no adverse impacts for automobiles, but a huge plus for bicyclists. So now we've got a great deal of continuity here on the bike network, and I've just talked to the director of this research park, and they're looking at continuing this with a redo of this park. So this is the kind of thing that often a very inexpensive improvement can have really important bike mobility advantages. So I want to talk about networks a little bit. So we really have to be thinking in terms of being able to get anywhere, from anywhere to anywhere without encountering an unacceptable level of stress. That would be the definition of a low stress network. So we've got to have mobility, we've got to have access, we've got to have safety and efficiency, not too much indirection in the route. And what I really want to stress here is creating this kind of a network requires a lot of flexibility and a practical approach tailored to the specific community. What you see here is just an old shot of our bike path network from a couple of years ago. We've closed a lot of these gaps, but if you look at this, you would think you had a very discontinuous network that didn't make a lot of sense. But if you were to combine this with some of the local streets and the bike boulevards and other on-street improvements that are low stress, we have a much more complete network than this. So by combining all these different types of facilities, separate paths, protected bike lanes, bike priority streets, local streets with continuity enhancements, that kind of thing, we really can create a network where people can get anywhere in the city. And again, I want to stress the importance. Mapping is obviously critical to this, good mapping of your routes, etc. But informed advocacy is really critical to identifying gaps in that network, places where people could use a route but they don't. Sometimes closing that gap is more expensive than the whole rest of the improvements. This is an example of a 4-mile bike path, a corridor, abandoned rail corridor in Madison. Fairly simple bike path to build in many cases, but it had to cross the belt line, 6 lanes of traffic, 2 frontage roads, so we're crossing 10 lanes of traffic here. So a fairly large percentage of the cost of this entire improvement went into closing this gap, into basically crossing the belt line. So a big project with a lot of mobility gains can often justify a large expenditure to ensure that continuity. Now, this is a, you know, it's a beautiful project from my standpoint, and you know, but it's an investment of a couple $1 million. These kind of projects are often opportunity driven. They're not likely to happen unless you have a abandoned rail corridor or a greenway of some sort that's already in place. Pretty difficult to create a corridor like this from scratch. But where it is available, it's really worth putting advocacy, time, and energy and funds into. More often, the continuity of the network, particularly the path network, is going to look more like this, crossing an arterial street, creating well-designed, safe, at-grade crossings. This is West Washington and Madison, a pretty high-volume street going into the Capitol, but we were able to reduce it from 6 lanes to 4 lanes, and that extra width allowed us to create a very wide median as well as a wide terrace on the side here, and that allows people to cross one direction of traffic at a time, makes what would have been a very intimidating crossing a quite safe crossing. And I take this one myself daily, and it really works very, very well. There are a lot of things we can do to improve these. Better marking, signing, high visibility, flashing warnings. There's a lot of things we can do to improve at-grade crossings, but they will continue to be an important part of our network. We're simply not going to be able to create grade separations, bridges like you saw in the previous photograph at all street crossings. Touch briefly on some of the tools that are really important to us these days, and particularly GIS. GIS data and mapping is allowing us to really move the needle forward on our planning. We can begin in Madison, for example, we can begin to query our GIS system and say, show me all of our bike paths as well as all of our protected bike lanes and our bike priority streets and extremely accommodating low volume streets. And we can then get a picture of our complete low volume network and identify the gaps. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting very close, and these kinds of tools are really important. But again, I want to stress that, particularly in smaller communities, this kind of tool can assist with the analysis, assist with public communication of where those gaps are, but it's no substitute for people who are just familiar with the situation on the ground, your advocates. This is just a close-up of the same GIS tool. This time the air photo layer is turned on, some property lines are turned on. So with these kind of tools, we can really begin to look closely at where we have rights of way, where we can create improvements and where we can't, where barriers are likely to be. So very important tools as we move forward with that planning. Now I want to talk about the whole principle of greater than zero-sum benefits. And this one, from my 16, 17 years at the city, I can't tell you how important this principle is. We still have most people traveling by automobile, and we don't really gain a lot of ground by creating this situation as a battleground between cars and bicycles. We need to really be looking at improvements that benefit bicycling, add mobility, without necessarily diminishing mobility for automobiles. We also particularly have to look at not diminishing mobility for pedestrians. That's very important. Sometimes we do a bicycle improvement and we've actually made it more difficult for pedestrians. We don't want to get into that kind of zero-sum game. We want to look for areas that we can improve biking without diminishing. And this is one. We took this is the same crossing where the two young girls were on their bicycles. We created separate pedestrian and bicycle crossing. This is still an excellent intersection for pedestrians. It works better for cars ever than it used to, and yet it also is creating a very safe and intuitive route for bicycles. This is really critical to public acceptance of these infrastructure expenditures and continued investment in bike infrastructure. Okay. Another really valuable zero-sum or greater than zero-sum improvement is a counter-directional bike lane. In Madison, we have a pretty extensive one-way network, street network near downtown and other areas. The drivers are accustomed to this. It makes it a little difficult to get around downtown, but they're used to it. The last couple of years, we've taken a couple of the one-way streets and created a counter-directional bicycle-only lane. So we haven't done anything to diminish the automobile mobility, but we've created a major improvement for bike mobility. So this is just one of them heading into downtown. We've got several others that look like this. Green pavement, same sort of idea. It really helps both perceived and actual safety for bicyclists, and cars actually like it too. They know where the bikes are going to be, and it's more predictable. This is a recent improvement. Very inexpensively, we were able to separate pedestrians and bicyclists on one of our busiest paths in the city. So this is increasingly important that we look at the difference between pedestrians and bicycles and provide for them separately. A few engineering issues to get into here at the end, just kind of a catch-all topic here, and show you some of the resources to look into this further. So the first issue that has come up a lot of times in my experience with the city is that a typical section, which is what you see in the upper part of this picture, cross-section of the road, often an improvement in that view looks very easy to do. You see a two-way cycle track there alongside a two-way, one-way or two-way street, and oftentimes advocates will seize on this and go, this is great, why don't you do that? This is perfect, it's easy. It's often not easy. Once we look at the actual plan view of it and look at all the different movements at the intersections, an improvement like this can become very, very complicated and potentially dangerous. So without getting into a lot of detail on this, what I want to suggest is that whenever we're looking at particularly some of the more innovative improvements like protected bike lanes and that sort of improvement, we really have to look at the intersections and how people will get from the street to that facility, how they'll get from that facility to make a left turn or right turn, all different conflicts. So what this really means is that visiting the site, understanding the unique conditions, and sometimes even getting professional assistance. It's really important, I think, that advocates be well-informed and respectful, I guess, of the complexity of some of these improvements. You know, because from my standpoint, as having worked in city engineering, we've often been criticized for not doing what seems to be an obvious improvement, but it's because we've often had to look at it more closely and seen some of the difficulties. Here is a two-way separated bike lane, and you get a sense here of how complex that situation can be. I could not find an example of a two-way protected bike lane along a two-way street intersecting another two-way street with signals. That I can't find an example of that anywhere in the literature or anywhere else. And it's because it's a very daunting problem, and here's one that's a lot simpler with one-way streets and a non-signalized intersection. As you can see, it's still could be fairly daunting to bicyclists. So I want to say my message here is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Sometimes it's necessary to create bicycle conditions where perhaps there's a reduced bicycle speed, or perhaps there's a stop for bicycles. That's better than compromising safety in any way. It's really important in all these improvements that we ensure safety, and most of the time lower speeds are going to work in that direction, even if they are somewhat diminish the mobility of bicycles. Again, I can't overemphasize that perceived conditions are really important to bicyclists. Even if something is objectively safe, but it looks scary, it will not attract new riders. And again, we need to understand the other modes as we advocate for bicycles. We cannot disregard the importance of the other modes and their needs. So some of the resources, just go through this quickly. This is the AASHTO Guide to Bicycle Facilities. It's something like the Bible. It's written in plain English. I think every advocate ought to get a copy and read it. Almost any bike engineer is going to have to be working through here. It covers geometry, lane widths, radii, sight distances, all kinds of things like that. But it's language anybody can read, and it's important to become familiar with it, I think. It's also authoritative. It's adopted by many states. It's an important source. It's not the most innovative document in the world. To fill that need, an organization called NACTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials, has developed a very, very important guide to bicycle facilities. And this is primarily an online guide. As you see it here, it's also available in a print format, but I really recommend you become familiar with it online. This is an amazingly useful document for advocates as well as engineers on all the different kinds of facilities that are out there, and shortfalls and the possibilities. Finally, if you're working in Wisconsin, you should be at least somewhat familiar with the Bicycle Facility Design Handbook. This is official, produced by the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. It is in some ways more detailed than the AASHTO Guide, but it's not necessarily up to date or terribly innovative. But be aware of it. There's lots of sources like this that are authoritative but not necessarily official. This is a great research paper on bike boulevards. There's this kind of information and out there, and it's really worth becoming familiar with it. This is in that category. This is the Crow Manual. It's something of the official manual in the Netherlands and other places in Europe that have extremely high mode shares, extremely high usage of bicycles. So it's got some great stuff in there, some very innovative ideas. Not all of them will transfer immediately over to the U.S. So with that, I would invite any questions. I appreciate your being here with me, and thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for sharing all your great ideas and resources. And I will send the resources again to the group. And also recording will be available as well as the presentations. The question I see here are the GIS tools that you referenced free?
Are the GIS tools free?
Yes.
No, absolutely not. You know, what I was talking about there was the GIS tools that are owned by the City of Madison. No, there's, to be able to make use of those requires a lot of computing power, specialists, data collection. No, they're not free. There's software and hardware and personnel costs. So more than likely, the GIS tools are going to belong to the public agency, and from an advocate standpoint, you want to be aware of them. Maybe work with city officials to produce the kinds of graphics or the kind of information you want from them, but most likely advocates are not going to be able to acquire that kind of technology.
Okay, and lots of thank yous, and thank you for sharing your information. And I don't see any other questions, but if I do get any more, I will share them. And so thank you so much for coming back and sharing all that you have with us.
Okay.
And thank you,
Well, thank you.
everyone.
And just to point out that,
Go ahead.
oh, I was going to say there's some very small changes in the slideshow from the last time, so I will send you. I'll share this again with you in case you want to put the
Wonderful.
current one up.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
And I will send follow-up emails and reminders for next week. So thank you, everyone, for attending.